Ian, we have a Patreon.
We do. Patreon.com/CU podcast. You go. You check out what we can offer you.
You do more than just go.
You part with a little cash. We appreciate that, and you can get access to the bonus podcast.
The bonus?
You get hangouts. We'll be doing one not this weekend because I'll be gone, but next weekend. You get access to these poll topics. You get the full video podcast. You get writing about once a week. There's one that's going to go live just after we finish here. And Pin Club.
Pin Club on top of it.
Forgetting anything else?
I don't know.
I think I got it.
I'm zoning out from talking about prices of sealed games that people lost a ton of money on. All right. In second place on this poll topic, thoughts on VR and the new PSVR 2 price tag, 37%. Rock the vote. It's election day. First place, 63%. The PC Engine turned 30 years old, Ian. We did not talk about it last week. We should have.
35.
35. I'm sorry. That's right. It's 87.
Yeah. 35.
Did I put down the wrong thing on the poll? I did. I wasn't called out on that. Oh. Thoughts and reflections on the good old PC Engine turning 35. That white and black console.
PC and white and red, like orangey to start with. The logo is orange. The console is white.
Wasn't there black on the controller? Whatever.
Oh, there's like gray. Yeah. So the PC Engine came out October 30th, 1987. It is one of my most favorite systems, up there with the original Game Boy. I love it to death. It's one of the few systems I still hold a physical collection for, and it will probably be the last physical collection I ever get rid of if I get rid of my stuff. It was kind of weirdly positioned as an in-between, you know, the 8-bit era and the 16-bit era. It processed, I believe it was colors and graphics based. It has an 8-bit central processing unit and a 16-bit graphics processor. So it's definitely more powerful than the Famicom or the NES, but it wasn't quite to where the Genesis was or the Super Nintendo.
In some respects, yes.
Yes, in some respects. It was loaded, and it's famous for having, the card, the games on the card.
Hue card.
The Hue cards.
Or Turbo Chip, as they branded in the US.
And that, was a novel way of packaging your games that I think really helped make that system stick out in people's minds, especially when it was advertised in the US. Something like that for a system that is, unfortunately positioned in a difficult place in the US, that is something that at least stands out, keeps it in people's minds.
Yeah, because it's unique, because there's nothing else that ever looked like that.
Right. The Japanese version had a number of Hue cards. I think it's somewhere in the 400s. And then they introduced the wildly popular CD add-on. It was popular in Japan.
And the first one of any console.
Yes, first one of any console. And they did bring that over to the US, but it didn't really gain the traction that it did in Japan. A fraction of the games that were ever released on CD, and I mean a minuscule fraction, ever came out over here. How many games came out over on the came out over here for the
30 something for CD?
Really? Okay, that's more than I thought. I thought it was like 20 something.
94 Turbo Chip. So the problem with the CD, we're going to go back and forth. The CD was super expensive. I think it was $250 in the US. We're talking that's in 90, $250.
Right.
That's a ton of money for an add-on, not even a standalone, for an add-on. That's nuts.
It says 45. So I looked it up. The PC Engine CD has a total of 417 licensed games for the PC Engine CD, and 45 were localized for the TurboGrafx.
Oh, 417 for total, not just CD.
No, 417 for just CD. It's what it says. And only 45 were officially localized for the TurboGrafx CD.
Wow, that seems like it's a high number. But okay. I got to double check that. But okay. So what's interesting to me about this is that this was during the time, the TurboGrafx 16, where you were still so married. The games that you bought were so married to your console, but TurboGrafx took it to this unfortunate extreme that hurt it, because NES and Genesis, they're different generations of consoles, so you can see why they would not have the same library. But the TurboGrafx was even more unique in that like it shared, at least in North America, it shared almost no games in any other platform. Like it just didn't.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot that crossed over.
Rare exceptions. You had Bonk's Adventure on the NES, but it was a late release. No one cared about it on the NES. And then, other than that, though, you're like you run out of ones that, or like Darkwing Duck or Tailspin, where they're not the same games as the NES, so they don't count. Obviously, in Japan, it was the library was much bigger. You had more crossover stuff. You had like Rondo of Blood versus Castlevania X, for example. You know, so you did have some of those that happened there. But it was still like when you look at a TurboGrafx 16 game, for most of the part, you can say immediately that's a PC Engine game. Just how it feels.
Yes, they all have a very specific feel, look, and sound. As much as I love the TurboGrafx, the PC Engine, the main unit did not have a particularly impressive sound chip. Sure. It wasn't until the CD add-on came out and people started getting Red Book audio that we were like, wow, the power of CDs.
Sure.
There was also a heavy anime focus. A lot of games that came to the PC Engine that didn't have any anime theming elsewhere would get anime theming added. R-Type, for instance, has an intro with an anime lead character as the pilot. Hellfire S for the PC Engine, as opposed to the Genesis version, has like anime characters attached to it, another anime intro. And I think Aeroblasters is the same. I don't think there was any real anime theming on the Genesis version, but I could be wrong. So there was definitely like a specific style that they shot for. As far as a system goes, like with a cohesive overall feel, I think when you look at the library, the PC Engine really nailed that.
Sure.
And I think it's because they had a couple of, very prolific publishers, which also stayed within their own style.
Yeah, Hudson Soft did a lot of games, obviously.
Yeah, Hudson Soft, Amusement Vision, Red, like all of those companies did quite a bit.
I'm looking at some of the other ones that came up a lot. Data East looks like did some. Keeps coming up. Again, looking at the Japanese, because the U.S. one, notoriously the U.S. was mostly, first-party games, too much to the detriment of the system, unfortunately. So the TurboGrafx 16, it was successful in Japan, obviously, very successful. These library, 670.
So 676 games, 412 of which were CD.
Okay, that's different Wikipedia. Wikipedia says 679 and then 389. So still a lot of CD.
So yeah, that's probably
so
right.
That's like more than half the library in Japan, which means that you had to get a CD to get the most out of it.
And I always say that to people when people want to get into TurboGrafx. I always say, if you aren't collecting specifically because it's the TurboGrafx, go with the PC Engine, and you always go with a duo unit because literally half your library is CD.
What the hell? I wonder what it cost back then, the CD unit in Japan, that they sold so many of it. I'm really interested in knowing that. And obviously they had 3 or 4 different versions of the CD you can get. Or
the system was just wildly more popular. And I have a feeling that also, keep in mind that when this came out, what actually probably moved this a lot was it was a CD player.
Sure.
I mean, we're forgetting
87, 88. Yeah,
we're forgetting it. It's just like the PS2, where when the PS2 had DVD functionality, it came out at a time where DVD was becoming more popular. It wasn't already like a thing. So people bought it for the DVD player. People bought that CD unit for the PC Engine.
And that was 88 December.
To play CDs.
So we're talking late 88, getting a CD player. Not many people had one yet.
Right.
They were super expensive standalones. You're probably right about that, if you can put that in. So the first one's released. Good old Fighting Street, also one of the first ones released here. You had Fighting Street. You had, let's see, Bikuraman Daijikai. So those were the first couple ones that came out that December there. And a game called Noriko. Those are the first few ones that came out.
I think that was a horror RPG.
Not familiar. So they had a good...
Oh, no. It's like a full motion video thing where like you interact with like a teenage girl.
Oh, okay.
Weird.
Well, okay.
Dating simulation.
Okay, well, that was one of the first games. They knew their audience. Dating sims are still hugely popular in Japan today. So they had a good year head start on the Sega Genesis in Japan, the Mega Drive, and they had 2 years head start on the Super Famicom. So they had a chance to get ingrained. When it came out here,
They were
only had-
playing catch up. They
were playing catch up with the Genesis. Well, the Genesis then were neck and neck. But the Super Nintendo, they also had a head start, but they didn't bring the games over here.
Right.
They just didn't.
Nope.
So it was slim pickings, as it was for me. I got it. The Christmas of '90.
I always liked the TurboGrafx. Like, I always thought it had some cool games, and it definitely did. But when, it wasn't until later in life, maybe like 5 years ago, when you finished up your set, and I started really looking at it, because I didn't collect TurboGrafx. I jumped right into PC Engine, 15, 20 years ago. And looking at what was actually brought over here in the US for the TurboGrafx, they were not the best picks.
No.
They were not providing their best men.
No,
it's really not that great of a library.
No, we can talk about how bad it was. Going back to the forums, talking about like it was always the communication between the U.S. side and the Japanese team, from what I know, and that they obviously requested for other games to come over, but like you got only one platformer of note on the entire console, like one mascot character, Bonk, in North America. That's unacceptable if you want to make a go of it. You cannot rely on shooters to sell a console in North America, and that's all you have. Like, you can't do that. There's not enough people out there that just want shooters. If you're a little kid, you want platformers, you want colorful characters. There wasn't enough of them. There just wasn't. And there wasn't enough games to fill the holes. We always talk about infamously how they never came out with Street Fighter 2 here, and that's a death knell for the console when your two competitors
should have been, especially because it
did great in Japan.
I think it beat the other versions to the no, not all. Maybe it didn't beat the other versions to the market, but it was a great version.
It does great in Japan. 6-button controller just for that in Japan. That's the reason why they came out with it.
No, there's other games that use.
But I mean, that was the impetus, though. Like, come on,
of course.
So. And when you look at that version, it's a great version. It stands toe-to-toe with you can say it's better than the Genesis one. Visually it is. And it stands toe-to-toe in accuracy in terms of it has the barrels in it. The barrel bonus round. You don't have that in the Super Nintendo. You just got the cars, for example.
Great sound.
Yeah. Controls are great. Controls fine.
Snappy. And I think it just loses some animation in the backgrounds. That's it.
Yeah, all the elephants.
I was gonna say you lose a row of elephants in the.
It actually has more accurate arcade music than the Super Nintendo. Super Nintendo goes like
it has more accurate sound all around.
But the biggest thing, one of the bad things,
and it has that fat little Who card. It's pretty. Have you ever seen it? It's a double thick. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Actually, what's interesting, before I get into it, it's really interesting how you can almost say the TurboGrafx 16 was the first console to do like the mid-generation shift with the upgrades.
Sure, because in addition to having the PC
CD upgrade.
or the CD upgrade, they then went on to release basically RAM packs that you would use to upgrade the functionality.
Super system card, arcade card.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. Exactly.
So like you don't have to buy a new console to get these technically more powerful games. You had to buy just the card, which probably wasn't that much money at the time, compared to probably like as much as most as a full game would have cost. But then, hey, now I can get a little bit better graphics going.
It's absolutely how they stretched it out for as long as they did, because that system had an incredibly prolific run from 87, I think, until
94, according to Wikipedia.
94.
That's 8
and
years.
I think a few things still trickled out afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you had an 8-year solid run in Japan, in the U.S. Really, in the U.S., you really had like
a couple of years,
really
3 years.
I want to say 3 years of significance.
I think that's about all I'd give it. Yeah.
When you went to TTI, when they took it over in the U.S., at that point we
were done.
You're doing like fucking mail order games mostly. I mean, you're still putting games in stores, but I don't remember games even by 93, 94 being in stores. Probably maybe like Electronic Boutique. I don't remember them being in Toys R Us anymore, but I really had to scratch my head and think about that.
First time I ever saw them, they were in Toys R Us, but yeah, probably didn't. Oh, no. They probably didn't stay there.
I know they were. Oh, they're absolutely there. I bought them there, and they had their kiosk. But I mean, like by like a couple years into the Super Nintendo.
Yeah, no.
I don't think
those were gone.
Toys was probably realizing we're not selling any of these anymore. So yes, it was the first iterative console to that extent. I mean, technically the CD is a different platform, but having the cards switching out for the arcade and super system was significant. And then, but the killer that they didn't figure out, at least in the US, was the one controller port that they probably should have done. They redesigned the console to be bigger for no reason. They probably should have put a second controller port on there.
Yes.
And I really, thinking back of how much that hurt the console, because I own a TurboGrafx 16. but I couldn't share the games or there's no 2-player action until I went out and bought $50 for $40 to $50 of the TurboTap was. I think it was 40.
Jeez, that is expensive.
So you got to spend $80, 80 on an extra controller and the TurboTap to make it a multiplayer console. On top of the fact that this console started off at $200 to $250. That was bad. Really fucking bad.
Yeah, and I can see a lot of US parents like looking at it and being like, this console has 2 controller. Okay, we're doing this. Stupid little nickel and dime shit like that never, ever works in video games.
Yes.
At least not in the US.
No.
But the Vita was another prime example of it. Hey, here's the system. It's $250. Also, we're using proprietary memory, and if you want enough to do anything, you've got to pay another $50 to $60. That does not. It's the stupidest, most short-sighted business decision because, like I said, it never works.
No.
It destroys these systems in the US.
You can't upsell so much that you're charging almost 50% of the value of the console. Well, even when it was started market down to like 150 and 100, but it was dead by then. But when they started marketing down to like 100, you get like 2 or 3 packing games. We'll give you Bonk for free. Let me tell you something again about Keith Courage. Again, one of the only games in the history of consoles where the packing game was never available separately for a reason. It's not a bad game.
No, it's not a bad game at all.
But no one was going to say, I want to play Keith Courage that badly.
Right.
Like no one ever, like, I guess you can count Wii Sports, but that's a totally different thing. They put that in, they packed it into tens of millions of consoles. I don't think.
Well, and Wii Sports was great. People would have bought that separately.
Correct. But Nintendo, they you know what I mean? They never bothered, I guess, at that point. Because they put out a sequel anyway, so it's like, what's the point? So I don't count that because they sold it. But for a console like that in the 80s, 90s, not to have it available separately says so much to me. That like it was such a misfire to include that game as a pack. At that point, you might as well have there's a coupon saying choose from one of 3 or 4 games to get. Immediately, Bonk's Adventure should have been a packing game. Immediately,
Yes.
And it wasn't.
Absolutely.
And it wasn't. So all these little steps, this is turning into more why the TurboGrafx failed versus what the PC Engine succeeded. But no multiplayer out of the box. You have to spend $100 to get multiplayer almost. Not enough platformers and mascot characters. When you get your mascot character, like Sega did, they immediately said, we're going to push this and make it a packing game.
Yep, we're going to take this guy to the moon.
To the moon. Bonk, I'm not saying Bonk would have been ever as popular as Sonic, but it could have been even a little bit more. A little bit more. I did not own Bonk's Adventure, and I should have. It should have been marketed to me and given to me, and it wasn't.
Yeah,
it wasn't, and it was out. The game was out. Yeah, it's a shame. Real shame.
Back to the more positive stuff. PC Engine, favorite system. Loads and loads of shooters on it, which is why I loved it, or why I still love it. And in Japan, it is not. The type of game doesn't really. It's not platformer. Remember when we were doing the NES book and we had a tough time sometimes distinguishing between like platformer and action and stuff like that?
Sure.
It seems fairly easy to distinguish that. There are a lot of action games like the Valis games on the PC Engine, and there is platforming, but I think
it's not heavy platforming.
I think of those as more action games where
Sure.
there actually is quite some heavy platforming.
It's an action platform. You can say it's a cross genre.
But all I'm getting at is as long as you broaden your description a little bit, tons and tons of platformers on the Japanese version. That
Yes.
That just never came here. All sorts of fun, little, quirky, rough around the edges platformers that I fucking adore. Like we
got Pac-Land here, which is like
not... And I like Pac-Land again, but it's not going to carry the fucking system.
And it's not a game a 4-year-old can easily pick up and play.
No, it's actually a very weird game with kind of awkward controls.
Awkward mechanics.
Yeah.
I like it, but it's
so do I.
It's not like picking up Super Mario Brothers and
no,
here you go.
No, it is not.
You get your ass kicked in Pac-Land
It
easily.
is not a Super Mario replacement.
It's a quarter muncher.
Yes.
And you got JJ and Jeff, which I never really played or got into, if you want to consider that.
I've heard that's good. But I haven't played it either.
But that's not going to appeal to kids. Like, who are these two idiots with sunglasses and a suit? Like, that's not going to appeal to kids. So it seemed like they went too far to we'll market to the teenagers versus you still have to market to children.
Especially, I think that
Genesis still marketed. Genesis still had games geared towards children.
I think that might be part of the problem as well. In Japan, acceptance of video games was always a little bit more...
A little more older?
A little more... Well, it started off a little bit older, whereas we really had to work it up here. So they probably tried to go for a similar, marketing route over here that was working over there. And over here, video games were still largely seen as kids stuff. So something like Bloody Wolf and Splatterhouse don't make the most sense.
Yeah, and obviously the marketing here sucked. We know that it wasn't released nationwide. It wasn't released in major markets. It was North Jersey and New York. So I was lucky enough to have
Lots of bad cover art.
Terrible. And then to this day, North American commercials for specific games, Bonk's Adventure, Splatterhouse, Legendary Axe, and I'm running out of commercials that came out. I don't remember. They had ones for the whole system where you see mobile, but I mean like game specific commercials
where you're not
Holy
just
shit.
trying to get people to buy
Yes,
the system,
which is bad. It's bad. I've never seen the Splatterhouse one. I don't remember. I know there's a Bonks one, I believe. But I don't remember even seeing. I'm trying to remember if I remember seeing that one because that came out December of '90. That's when I won my. Excuse me. No, that came out December '89. I got my console December of '90. I remember they were still pushing Bonk then, trying to advertise it in the newspaper in the giveaway thing.
Yeah.
But they gave me Bloody Wolf for some reason instead of Bonk. Like, again, just really, just messed up thinking. But we love it. It's a quirky system. A lot of firsts. You know, we love our firsts. Ian loves his shooters on it. Good for Fire Pro in Japan.
Yep.
Imagine there was Fire Pro in the U.S. Imagine 10-year-old Pat. I would have been in heaven playing that game. Would have been in heaven. Because I not that I didn't like the NES wrestling games. I thought they were okay, but they never like hooked me in where I had to own one. I'd rent WCW and was like, okay, I'm done with it. I play pro wrestling. Okay, that's enough pro wrestling. They weren't as deep as obviously Fire Pro. Where it's like, holy crap, let's get into the move sets. Let's get into this. All right, well, that was fun. We'll see you in 5 years for the 40th.